Welcome to the Enneagram Panels podcast. My name is Jim Zartman, and I am here talking about the fives with Enneagram coach Joel Hubbard.
Yeah, man, I am thrilled. This is this particular one, we're now heading into the head triad, right? So we've left the heart triad. You're going to notice, if you've been following along, a distinct shift. If there's any sort of really big major shift, it's from the 4 to the 5.
Yeah, this has got to be one of the most misunderstood types, even though people desperately want their skills. This is a sharp group of people, and our panelists are a very sharp group of people.
Brilliant. I mean, you listen to some of them, and not all fives are the most brilliant people in the world, but they've mastered their brains to such a degree. They love knowledge, research, information. So oftentimes they do ascend to very high positions in the work world and become very accomplished. You watch how the energy level drops off from, if you've been listening again, from the 4, or how it changes really from the 4 to the 5, because what happens when you get to the 5 is you start to see a type that really thinks through everything they say. It's not so much self-editing as much as it is there are so many compartments in their brain.
Yeah.
And they know they've got it filed somewhere, and they got to go find the file. And when they find it, they pull it out. And if you give them time and you give them the space, they will come up with something, and it's good. It may take a while to get there, and it may take a while to deliver it, but it is really, really good stuff. And you can count on it. When you ask a 5 a question, about anything that they have really researched, you can count on it. It's good information.
Right. They're not just making it up as they go like some of the other types, but so this was a hard one actually to edit, because all of these I wanted to edit them for, being concise and for sake of time and clarity. But one thing you miss out when you're just listening as opposed to sitting in there is 5s take these long pauses where they really want to choose the right words, choose the thing they really mean. And if I left that in, it would have been long, and also it would have been kind of hard to just listen to. It's different when you're watching them. So I had to edit out so many of these long pauses as they're talking to make it as concise and as tight as possible. But just know that when you're watching a 5 talk, a lot of times you're thinking, why is this taking so long? But they are choosing so intentionally everything that they say.
Yeah, and why can't I read them either? Because like some people say, well, I can't read them.
Yeah, they're poker masters.
They're poker. I mean, they just are no affect whatsoever.
No,
right? No facial cues. No. And that can be difficult for some folks when they're like talking to them, because many people read, again, facial cues, body cues, emotions.
And they have the least.
And they have the least of all of that.
Right.
And so, but again, what you're going to pick up on as you listen to this episode is that it's not that they don't want to be that way by choice, but rather that it's an issue of necessity for them, that they feel like, in order for me to get to up here in my headspace and really have an answer that's thoughtful, that's important, I need to give you this because you've asked, and that means something to them. If I'm giving you this information, it's got to be really good. It's got to be accurate. So what happens when your emotions get involved? Well, that messes that whole accuracy thing up, and that precision thing, and that need to again, to give very good, accurate information.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Joel gives a longer description at the beginning, and then you get to hear from them. So let's do this.
So we are in the head triad now, and for those of you who've been with us up to this point, 8, 9, and 1 are the body triad, the people that process life through action or through inaction, but it's very much about the action forward or a reticence of action, a hesitancy in action, but that's the orientation. And also primarily dealing with the emotion of anger or buried anger, but it's primarily that which the body type gets access to mostly. Then we went to the heart triad, which is the 2, 3, and 4. The 2, 3s, and 4s process life much more through the emotional center. So it's much more about what they feel, what they observe around them is going on, and deal primarily with sadness, grief, shame, as more the emotion that seems more present to them anyways than anxiety or anger. Now we're entering into the head triad. Head triad people primarily processed through the head, and rationality, and also deal mostly with anxiety and fear. Anxiety is a sort of constant for the head types. The fives early on intuited, discerned that life was a bit intrusive and that the five had needs. The five had desires. The fives wanted to be nurtured, wanted to be cared for, but on their terms. So fives looked for it, but early on didn't quite find it, but also began to pull away because fives have this intuition that life is consuming and that they need to store up the resources, to have enough. And also discovered along the way that many fives describe themselves as being sort of having a low self-esteem about their ability to do things, their ability to play ball on the field with the other boys, to be as great as a musician as the other musicians. And so the five found themselves really escaping into their head and into the place of which is a place of great confidence for the five, and finding one or two, although their interest is broad and vast and eclectic, fives will find the one or two things that they become really, really good at. There's an ongoing fear of not being useful, not being capable, and the fives become sort of a resource point. So people come to the fives for a lot of answers, and you can trust a five. If you ask a five a question, if the five doesn't know, the five will say, "I don't know." I have no problem saying I don't know, but they'll say, "I'll get back to you." And when the five gets back to you, watch out, because the five is going to have an answer, and it's not going to be a 5-minute answer. It's going to be very thought through, very thorough. You can count on that. The fives go to the head. The fives have this uncanny ability. They have the best poker faces. If you ever play poker with a five, you will lose. Fives can maintain a look without any affect. There's no giving away of the emotional space. Why? Because the five has mastered the ability of total detachment, the ability to leave almost their emotions, but almost leave their body as well. The five can watch themselves do things, in fact, and watch conversations. They're called the observer, the investigator, because they can observe and they're brilliant at it. They can watch with great rationality, which is also another reason why people really trust fives with information and knowledge and wisdom, because the five is not involving the emotional center oftentimes in that space. And so when they give you an answer, it's generally unbiased. They can actually be in the middle of a fight, and they can watch that and point out, similar to the nine, as we talked about. So those of you who are the nines have the capacity of understanding all the different viewpoints out there. The fives can too, from the head center, and they can watch and see what's going on and have an unbiased view of things. They love to synthesize material, to bring things that seem disparate together. They can be very eccentric in their pursuit of knowledge, too, to the degree that it becomes impractical in some respects. So fives, as you can see, in disintegration, fives go to the seven. So the seven is the low side of the seven. So the seven is the enthusiast, but on the low side, they're very distracted people. It's this idea, it's that idea, it's this, and they can't land on anything, or settle on anything. Well, fives in stress, as they can investigate something and really research something, when they become stressed, they will tend to bounce around and go from idea to idea, from plan to plan, from thought to thought. But in health, the five finally gets into action and starts to look a little bit like the eight, which is the eight on the high side of the eight. The eights are very action-oriented and get things done. So I've said enough about me. You can talk about the five forever. There's so much fascinating things about the five. But I'd love to hear from you guys, because even though I'm in the head triad as well, your language for the five is what I'm interested in hearing about, and how you would describe yourself. So
are you leaving this open-ended then?
I will, but then we'll guide it with some more questions around the particular
because that could take a while to figure out which place to start.
This is the part of the reason why I want them to do this, because you're already seeing the type emerge right here. This is fascinating.
I guess one of the things I've described to people, and this ties into the being inside the head. And as I was sort of reminiscing on my past at one point, I think with family, I was starting to like recount things that had happened to me and that other people in my family were part of, and they look at me and go like, that never happened. And so I started realizing that because I spent so much time in my head as a kid, sometimes just thinking about things, there was actually like, it was hard as time went on. And, I don't really remember much detail other than certain things of my childhood. But because most of it I didn't deem it terribly important. So some of these memories, I guess, as I talk through them with different family members and realize, like, I don't really know if what I remember as my childhood actually happened or not, to some degree. But so that maybe gives you a little light into the headspace. There's also the thing of somebody. We could be having a conversation, and I'll be working on a problem back here, and you'll be talking to me, and we'll be having a conversation, but I'm kind of working on like maybe two or three other things in the back of my head. So sometimes it's very hard to like actually like bring myself back to focus, to be present, to actually like have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And then just finally like chit chat.
Don't care for it.
Is a wasted time, basically. I don't think there's anything that makes a five's eyes glaze over faster or retreat to that part in our head than like just like random talk about weather or sports, or unless that happens to be our thing. But if it's just generic chit chat, we're gone.
So as you were giving all your explanations, it was yes, all of those things. I have found myself in the work environment being one that I always used to envision me having a sign on the door saying the doctor is in. And people would come with whatever problems they had, and I would either know the answer or I'll research it, I'll get back to you. Sometimes I was not exactly doing what my boss wanted me to be doing, but I was spending more time helping out everybody else. Yeah, and to me, there's never enough information. There's always more to find out. You can never know it all, but you want to know it all. So you're going to just keep drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling until you get it. And then you want to share that with people in the panoramic long version, which they don't want to hear. To me, knowledge is power. It's always been, knowing, being confident in what I know. If I don't know something, I'll, as you pointed out, I will up front tell you I don't know. That got me into trouble once at work because I was sent as a consultant out to California to meet with somebody in one of our other divisions. And as I'm out there working with the people, I basically got to the point of, I don't know the answer to this. And that person then got back to my boss with, I thought you were sending out an expert that knew everything. And, well, I'm sorry. If I don't know, I don't know. And I'm not going to make it up. I've worked with people that just make it up, and that drives me nuts. Absolutely nuts. So.
Thanks, Ron. So I'm Peter. I'm from Cambridge. I felt like, as Joel was, and I was really impressed, Joel, by your description, because I felt like you'd completely exposed me.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's actually probably a good thing to come out, because as a 5, I like to hide. That's maybe part of the type, but also I think I tend to be an introvert. Yeah, where do I start? I guess you mentioned fear. I think for me, a fear amongst, and I share a lot of fears I'm sure that everyone here can relate to. But the one that probably stops me in my tracks the most is appearing incompetent. So I do my very best to hide my weaknesses, my lack of knowledge. And maybe that ties in with what you were saying about going to your head to compensate for other areas of weakness. So, relying on the intellect to sort of compensate for other areas where I feel vulnerable. I think the other things that you mentioned, which, reminded me of my own growth work, is how because I emphasize the head, I tend not to, and I think it's also related to the poker face thing that you were talking about. I don't disclose my feelings readily, and I tend to not be that attentive to my physical comfort or physical well-being. So sometimes it has to be a health scare before I realize, oh, gee, I better pay attention to my back, or I better get back into the gym, or I should probably not be having the bag of chips with my lunch. So I think there are deficiencies that were highlighted, I think, very accurately by your description of the typical 5. The other thing, though, is that, and I related a lot to what you said about being an integrator and a synthesizer of information, because when someone asks me what are some of my skills and strengths, I actually like to gather information, and I like to see connections and integrate apparently disparate domains of knowledge. So, like, I'm a physician by training, but I'm also an investor, and I advise early stage companies in healthcare and life sciences. I also have a background in public health, so I actually bring all these different fields of knowledge into my work, whether it's when I'm talking with a patient or whether I'm advising an entrepreneur about their business model and their strategy. I mean, I enjoy that. That kind of gives me, I guess my juice is flowing when we try to look at, we drill down, and then we also back out and look at the big picture. Anyway, I'll let the questions, the Q&A time elaborate some of these things, but I just want to say that.
I want to continue. That's some great stuff that you just brought up in terms of synthesizing information. I'd like to hear more about that because it's one of the things that 5s are really, really good at and bring as a gift to many other people, is the capacity to make sense. And this all takes place in the rational part of the brain. You're kind of piecing the puzzles. Puzzles are fantastic for 5s. It's, you just gave me a problem. You just gave me a gift. Like, I'm going to be busy for a while, particularly if I'm interested in this problem. Like, this is something that's fascinating to me. And to be able to take different parts of your interests, being a physician, an investor, and bringing those things together in fascinating ways. It doesn't seem, other people would say, how do those things combine?
Right.
So I'd like to hear more about that in all of your lives as 5s, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I think I elaborated a little bit on that, and maybe this would have been a really valuable clue as to my type. But I think since I've been young, as far as I can remember, I've always been curious, and I've always tried to, see connections and gather information from seemingly unrelated fields to gain insights into, what it may be a cause-effect relationship that isn't so obvious. And problem solving and stuff like that has been part of my professional work as well as a doctor.
Oh man! So integration and like synthesis and things like that. I don't know if I knew like early on that was necessarily what was going on, but I have, as I've gotten older, and especially in the last or at least more recently in my previous career, what I've been doing now, there's always been a sense that basically anything's possible. So, somebody comes with a solution, they're like, oh, there's no way. Yeah, there's a way. You just have to figure it out. And there's probably, thing over here that somebody's worked on or done, and something over there that somebody's done, and just nobody thought to put them together. It's kind of like the, chocolate and peanut butter. And one of the practices I have is I usually am reading about 4 or 5 different books at the same time. And it's not like, it's slow going. It's not like I'm, reading 5 books in a week, but I read them at the same time so that I can one's a little bit more interesting, or I'm finding it more interesting and I'm reading that, or one's in, paper form and one's on my Kindle app, and so it depends upon where I am that I might be reading that. But I find these happy sort of coincidences on things that I would you wouldn't necessarily put them together as having a connection, but there's I often find that there's 2 or 3 different things that I'm reading that all of a sudden, like, wow, this new thought comes into my head about things that are disparate things that are in each of these books or each of these different categories. So that's always just a fun thing to kind of realize those things. And then sometimes they don't get to put together until somebody asks me an interesting question, and then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, I just read that and this and this other thing, and it starts the wheels churning. As far as the synthesis part, that I think explains it for me at least.
Yeah, it's all discovery. It's either discovery of something potentially new, or discovery or rediscovery of something that it's already out there, or putting 2 or 3 things together that weren't necessarily put together before. And Nancy always used to make comments to me, we were in the middle of something, and I just give her some answer about something. And she says, "How do you know that?" I don't know. I just know it. It's just, random pieces of knowledge and whatever. But they do come together. And
So let me spring off of that, because this is fascinating about the 5. If you ask a 5 a question, right? Tell me if this is true of you guys. The answer is not going to be bam. You don't open your mouth to then start thinking.
oh no.
Unlike the 7. The 7 starts with the mouth, My dad's a 5. He used to always say, Joel, think before you speak. Have the brain in gear before you start, talking.
I always, when I was in meetings at work, all this conversation is going on. All this conversation, buzz, 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 buzz. And I'd just be sitting there, not saying a word. And then halfway through all the blah, 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 I'd come out with something. And it was always,
That was, and probably something so insightful, everybody else thought, wow, we've been just like blabbing and not getting it, and you're just like, there it is.
Yeah.
Even the ability to synthesize what everybody else is saying.
Oh, yeah.
Unless it's nonsense.
And if there's just disagreements going on in the room, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. What he's saying is this. What she's saying is that. Yeah. You guys are doing one of these things. You're just not connecting.
Yeah.
Get over it. Come on. Let's.
Because again,
it's not an emotional
thing. Not an emotional thing. Exactly. I was just going to say that.
We're here trying to do something, and we can't get past this block because you guys aren't talking to each other. You're not communicating. What's the matter with you?
That is perfect. That's perfectly 5. Yes.
I don't know. That might have been a flash of the 8, actually. And I mean that as a compliment, because I think when you're bold and you just, and you just speak out, sometimes that's where you're progressing, not regressing. And I think for me, and I'm not an Enneagram expert, so don't take me too seriously, but I know from my tendency is to withdraw and to withhold. And that's due to a lot of things. Insecurity, it's also a scarcity mindset. Like, oh, there's not enough knowledge, and if I share it with everybody, then my advantage is diminished. Those beliefs are in the background, even if I don't explicitly acknowledge them. So at least when I've been in those types of situations, I may be aware of and or thinking those things, but it takes an effort on my part to actually put that out and share it with my with my colleagues in the room. So
nice. Thank you. So let's talk about the emotional part, processing emotion for the 5. This is one of the things, as you can see up here.
What's emotion?
What is that?
This is going to be hard work in the next few minutes here. But
I go up to this challenge.
No, because I'm also in the head triad, so it's extra effort for me. Contrasting to last week where we had the 3s and 4s, and the 4s in particular, this is not easy for the 5s to process emotion. When something is happening that is difficult, a crisis, a painful situation going on, a loss of some kind, what do you guys do? What happens inside you? What do you... See, the 5 is going to take a while to answer this. Usually the 5 goes through many categories because they've got these files, and they get files within the files. And so as they're searching through the files, they're accessing the information. Thing is, when we deal with emotions, there's no file for emotions, is there? It's just sort of something that all 5s, by the way, this is the misunderstanding, all 5s feel all of the range of emotions. The issue isn't the feeling of it, the issue is the processing of it and what happens in the process. So when you're looking at a 5 and there's no affect, it's not that the 5 isn't feeling stuff. The 5 may be feeling a whole bunch. So I'd like to hear from you guys. Is that true? Do you feel the range of emotions that isn't coming across in your body language? And what are you doing as those feelings are coming up?
Can you hand them the manual?
I mean, I guess I would start off with saying, yeah, I mean, we do feel emotions. I know I do, but in the moment, you're not really, like, you know, it might, I don't know, it's really tough to talk about. 'Cause I mean, here's it's like, so, you know, if let's say somebody passes, a family member or something. I mean, certainly when I think about, you know, my parents eventually passing, that's, you know, something that makes me sad when I think about it. But at the same time, it's going to happen. I mean, it's something that happens to all of us. So it's, you know, I understand it's going to happen. So it's not, or maybe it doesn't impact me as much, I guess, or I don't know. I don't. I have I'll do that. I have a morning journal that I do most mornings. I have a template that I created, and one of the blocks is emotions, right? And trying to force myself to do that. And most mornings, it's like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm not awake enough to have emotions right now. I'm like, I sit there for like 5 minutes trying to think of an emotion that I'm having, and. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I think maybe I'm a little depressed, you know, I mean, or something, or I think I'm okay. I mean, I think I'm happy. My eyes water all the time when I'm listening, especially listening to music. I hate it. It's kind of annoying. I mean, I'm trying to enjoy the song, sometimes trying to sing it, and it's hard to sing when you're like, have the feeling like you're going to sneeze at the same time because your eyes are doing this thing and your nose is tingling and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, I just want to enjoy the song. I don't want to like get all mushy about it. But I'll pass.
So Myers-Briggs has the introvert, extrovert, whatever the next one is, but the thinker-feeler is the third one. And I used to chat with Nancy that, you know, I'm a high T, but my F battles against my T every once in a while. So I do feel things. I do cry at movies or at a song, but I clearly don't live there. I mean, that's not, when it comes to making decisions and doing things and whatever, it's not based upon how I'm feeling about something. It's based upon what's logical, what's the right thing to do. So processing feelings, if I knew what I was feeling, maybe I could process it. I don't have a clue what I'm feeling. You know, I just, because again, I don't live there. So...
So I don't know how much of this is ingrained or inborn, or how much of this is learned. But on the inborn part, my mother is a 5, I think, and she does tend to go to her head and And even now, I think the message spoken and unspoken that I got, and I get sometimes, is that emotions are not that important. And then the other part that was probably formative is when I grew up, my father was a very explosively angry person. So, I associated anger with danger, and so I sort of went the opposite direction. And I think it was reinforced by teachings that I think were well-intended from, a lot of Christian teachers that, anger was not a good emotion, and you should not go there, not give it full expression. So sort of in that milieu of growing up with those messages, I started to idolize fictional characters like Spock, so like no emotion, just straight logic, let's just figure this thing out. And it served me well because I think it helped me survive my family, which was, rather turbulent. And also it served me well as a professional because I could work under duress, stress, without losing my cool. What's nature, nurture? I don't really know, but I relate a lot to what my fellow panelists have said. I think to bring it back to me, I've had to work on being aware of my feelings, but I think as much, if not more, I've had to work on expressing my feelings. So I'm pretty aware of what I'm feeling, but I haven't felt like I had license for all of these reasons I've alluded to actually give them expression. So that's been part of my work. The other thing that I've become aware of is that actually one of the clues for me about what I'm feeling, if I'm not able to immediately identify it, is what I'm feeling in my body. Because I tend to channel my feelings into my physical being. It could be as simple as a migraine, or it could be muscle tension in my neck and my shoulders. It could be insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night. But these are clues that, something is troubling me inside and I need to really examine it and bring it before God. So for me, the bodily cues have been important ways for me to get in touch with my feelings.
Thank you. Yeah. The fives needing, or all head types needing to process things in the head, by definition means that the emotions are ignored, or the emotions aren't you're not allowing them to come out. You're not expressing them. There's an automatic thing that happens with the emotions. You don't think about what you're doing. It's just automatically that's what happens. So the emotions go down, and then it's about solving the problem. How do we fix this thing and get to a desired outcome? So fives will do this to kind of, again, repress the emotions. And when pressure is on, which for fives in the workforce, it's constant. So there's all this pressure, there's all this stress. It takes effort, tremendous effort. And this is so important to understand, and why patience is necessary and compassion is necessary, is it takes so much effort for the fives to then go and actively, which unless you're aware and you're being encouraged in this way, you're not going to do it, but actively processing the emotions or finding ways to do that. And one of the things I encourage fives to do all the time, and 5s, 6s, and 7s, and I try to practice this myself, is that I try weekly to find a way to access the emotions. So through music, there's certain songs that really evoke emotion for me, and I've become a student of those things. I am becoming a student of what it is that triggers my own waterworks, because if it does it, then I can also then access it. It opens me up to unprocessed pain, and that's when I can process the pain. Some types you've already known that, so you watch sad movies. You just automatically know that, so you do that. To me, that's always been a thing you avoid at all costs. So I rather fantasy, like fives, a lot of fives tell me they love fantasy and they love sci-fi because it's a way of escaping from reality, not to keep looking at it. And that was a battle with my wife and I, not a battle, but a joke and argument that we would have when she would watch. I'd ask her, why are you watching these? Why do you want to watch a sad movie? Because it helps me to cry. It helps me to, why would you want to do that? Like, why would you want to look at that? That doesn't make any sense to me. I want to watch something that takes me out of that. But that's been really wisdom for me because that has helped me. And then now I'm helping others. That's a way to access the emotional space and to do that methodically, weekly, whatever it is, to then help you to become more integrated with body and emotion. So I thank you, Peter, also for mentioning the body. That's a really significant tool as well, as pay attention to what your body's telling you. Maybe another question. Let's talk about your need for privacy. Fives oftentimes like to withdraw. They like space. They like to go off on jaunts. Some like to travel alone. Like, get in my car and get away and just, I'm gone. Oftentimes without telling people, just like, boom, gone, disappear. Talk about your need for privacy.
So I think in terms of privacy, it's kind of serves two. Well, one, it's kind of our natural place because that's where we can do, undistracted thinking in having that sort of a private place or, the space to do that. On the other side, we're constantly looking for, I think, space to replenish energy, especially when I was working full-time in my previous career in the government. It was so stressful. I had the same thing, like people coming in my door like constantly and sometimes screaming at the top of their heads because of something going on. And I'm just sitting there like shell shock, like taking this all in, trying to like calm the whole thing down, calm it down. And so, I'd leave work and I'd get on the train and I'd be like passed out in like 2 seconds as soon as I sat down for like the half an hour ride home. Just all that would catch up to me. But then like I wouldn't do much. Like I didn't have much of a social life. The last thing I wanted to do when I got home was actually see another person, unless it was in a type of environment that I could kind of control or know about. So it was very important. That's where I recharged, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up finally leaving there, because it was unhealthy balance for me. On the downside of that, it can become very easy to fall into that habit, and relationships kind of suffer, friendships suffer, family. I can go for months at a time and not talk to my parents, who I'm very close with, just because I just don't think of it, or if I do think about it, it's at a time where they're probably asleep, because I'm usually up in the middle of the night and they're not. But yeah, it's mostly about that space to find the energy, or just to be able to have clear thoughts. And so I tend to work best on my own, but I also recognize there's things I need other people to sort of help bounce off or help me think through things at times as well. But if I've got the idea and I'm going, I'm just going to, I need like total space by myself, get it done.
There are times that I need privacy just because there's too much going on. Mm-hmm. And I can't focus on what I need to be focusing on right now. Mm-hmm. It's not that I'm trying to get away from people or whatever, but in my work environment, I've mostly had, private offices. And so, yeah, I'd be locked in that office all day. Of course, if anybody came to the door, I'd be happy to talk to them. And everybody would knock on the door and say, I know you're busy. Okay. And I was busy because I'm researching something or other and whatever. But, another point that you made, that sometimes Nancy and I get into this thing. I'm a problem solver. And there are times in our relationship as a 2 and a 5 where I have to stop and say, okay, do you want me to solve the problem? Or do you want me just to empathize with whatever's going on? I really just want you to empathize. Okay, fine, I'll shut off the solving problem mode and I'll just try to listen. But that's work. That's work. It doesn't come naturally. At least in our relationship, we've figured out how to work these things out. So,
yeah, that dynamic plays out with my wife as well. I think, again, it was reinforced by my profession, where I was given a short amount of time. I had to gather the data and then come up with a diagnosis and a plan. So I just sort of fall into that mode of operation very easily, and a lot of times that's not what Stephanie would want. So I relate. I mean, I think I don't know if it's a core trait of fives, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is that fives do need some alone time to recharge their batteries, to sort of help their minds process and organize and put in those neat files all that information that they have gathered and all the observations they've made. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's part of why I also find that I do need breaks during the course of the day. And I cherish those hours or two that I have in my study or in my office where, there isn't any distraction. But I think where I found the rub in that and the trap is that my tendency to isolate also has not served me well. So when I struggle with some issue, some internal pain, hurt, difficult relationship, difficult choice, isolation, I've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, is really the worst thing that I can do. So I've had to pay attention to the dashboard of my emotional experience and say, oh, that light's blinking. I've got to actually press against this tendency to isolate and try to solve it all by myself. And I think that relates to another area of struggle for me, and perhaps it's shared by a lot of other fives, is that it has been historically very hard for me to acknowledge my need for help, my deficiencies, whether it's because of my personality type and or because of the beliefs that I grew up with, the teachings from my parents and my culture to be self-sufficient, not to depend on other people, try to figure everything out by yourself. That's been an area where I've needed to work on and be comfortable, or at least be willing to acknowledge my limitations and ask for assistance. That's been another area where I think my tendency to isolate, to be by myself, to be an introvert has actually not helped me, because I probably would have done and solved and or addressed certain issues faster if I had been willing to open up and ask for help.
Yeah, beautifully said. Good.
Just add on to that is fives can tend to, and this is something I discovered in the past year of doing some of this work. Over the past 5 years or so, I've been doing this project of letting go of things and simplifying, and it's a big trend right now, and I'm like, yeah, I'm really good at this, and I'm like proud of myself. And then I read all this stuff about fives, and we will actually put our own selves out first in order to help somebody else. We'll actually live on the minimal, if that helps somebody else. So in other words, we tend to keep that stuff in and say, well, I can deal with that, or I can handle that. Part of it too is anytime somebody comes to you, no matter what you're feeling at that time, somebody comes to me and says, hey, I need this, or I've got this going on, or this, all right, that all gets sort of pushed aside. You're dealing with the problem in front. So, and we can do that very easily. But it also, as I'm realizing, it's I need to actually watch that, because it is something I do naturally and is not necessarily always a strength. And I have to be aware to actually engage and share and do that, which is really
Not
frustrating.
Easy. Yeah. Thank you. All right, questions from the audience. Yes.
I think that I have a loved one who is a 5, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how to connect more closely. So I think my dad is a 5. I'm extremely emotional, and I want to find meaningful ways to connect with him. I'm wondering, what is the most meaningful way for you as a 5 to connect to other people?
If I put myself in your position, trying to have a connection or create more of a connection with me as a 5, a lot of times an intellectual conversation with minimizing the emotional display, because that I will tend to try to run away. Yes. either physically or mentally. But at the same time, 5s, we need people to explain to us what is going on. So it's helpful for me to have a discussion of the emotion and what's behind it, and to actually analyze it and have just a conversation. And I would also agree that, doing something together like a project or walking or something like that also is helpful, because you're in your body then. So I guess that frees you up to have a little bit more open connection, I think.
What was helpful for me, and I think my wife, was to go back to the love languages. So for me, touch and quality time were the top two. Identifying that, sharing that with Stephanie, she knew, okay, those are two things that I can do that would be nourishing and would connect with Peter. So actually some of these themes I think could be applied to, what my two co-panelists have shared tonight. I mean, the quality time, just being together in the kitchen, taking a walk together, being in your body. The other thing, though, which may be counterintuitive, is actually it's jarring to me to be confronted with either someone expressing their feeling or checking in with me and saying, I'm sensing you're angry, or I'm sensing you're sad. Is this true? And to have someone reflect that back to me, actually, even though it's not comfortable for me, it does connect me with myself and with the other person sometimes. So you might, if that's not too scary territory for you, to explore that with your father. It's just to share your feelings and then to check out what he's feeling and see where that takes you.
Really good.
So thank you so much to our 5 panel for helping us better understand them and even being willing to delve into the emotions. If you'd like to learn more about the Enneagram, or you're interested in coaching or a typing interview, you can contact Joel through www.joelhubbard.com. The Enneagram's Panels podcast is produced by Talkie Records Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts, and made possible by Vine 39 Church in Stoneham, Massachusetts. If you enjoy and appreciate what we're doing here, please rate us on iTunes. It helps more people find the show. Thank you so much, and next time, Enneagram type number 6.